We were always interested in growing our business, and whenever an opportunity for an acquisition was presented to us, we would consider it, whether it was strategic or not, whether we can afford it. Ladislav Kaplan came here the same year my grandfather came here in 1905. They were a friendly competitor of my grandfather's. Have a ledger book from 1922 where you see they were exchanging materials. And Ladislav was a cello maker, and he also made some violins. He was a luthier, and he was quite a mechanical genius. And when he got here, he saw there was this big shortage for orchestral strings. It was very similar to my grandfather's operation. They had a nice house in the suburbs, and in the backyard was another building with a garage and a machine shop and the string making factory, which was like 6, 7 people. Ladislav, he had 2 sons, Otto and Stanley. So Otto was running the company. We were ready to make the acquisition and learn from him, but he just couldn't sell it. And he passed away, and Marge, his wife, a lovely woman, approached us immediately, and it was a tiny business, and we decided to buy it. But it was a difficult thing to unravel because the guy with all the answers had passed away. We really weren't equipped to develop orchestral strings on our own. Otto Kaplan designed a machine called the Kaplomatic, and he only made one of them. And this was a machine that was like a turret. It had 6 spindles, and in the first position, he would wind aluminum wire on a gut core, and they were famous for their aluminum A string. And this machine made that product. The machine was built the year I was born, and here we are in 1981, and he never built another one, you know what I mean? And it was like extremely old technology, and it just wasn't running right. And then the machine just completely broke down. Desktop publishing was getting started, and December 82, they released AutoCAD. I think I was the second guy on Long Island to have a copy, and I got really good at it. And it was like AutoCAD on an IBM PC without even a hard drive, 2 360K floppies. Drive A, you put the program in with 6 disks. Drive B, you put your data file, right, that you were drawing. And if you did a different command, it would say insert disk number 2. You had to take the disk out, put the disk in. I designed that whole machine in 3 months on that PC in the TV room when my kids were watching TV at night. And that taught me how to engineer precise drawings. So I learned engineering just on the job and by having really good people that I went to as resources to teach me. And it was exciting because I was learning something every day. And I also envisioned how to make these machines better and better. So I called it Kaplomatic 2. Which had 2 carriages and did the same kind of function. And then we made Kaplomatic 3, and we made it a little better. We had another winding carriage. So we just finished Kaplomatic 9. So that technology has now evolved and gotten so much better. We learned a lot of things from the Kaplan acquisition. I mean, it was a tiny company, but it got us into the orchestral market, got us a little bit of credibility. And from that point, I had to find some experts to help us take it to the next level, and that was when we brought in Norman Pickering, famous Pickering stereophono cartridge inventor, and he was primarily hired to help us design orchestral strings, new and better strings, and he worked for us until 1999 when he was 99 years old and passed away. So the Kaplan acquisition grew into being a full line of strings, has become a significant part of our business and growing every year. We started to experiment with copper-clad steel wire. I was always asking every vendor, what do you got? Curiosity is my thing. So in this particular case, we were buying the nickel-plated steel from GTE Sylvania at the time. They made this copper-clad steel for some other product. So I said, wow, would you run some of it in diameters we use for bass strings? Because everybody was buying Rotosound, really bright-sounding Rotosound bass strings. So it was a low-carbon wire that could be used as a wrap wire to wind a string. And instead of plating, cladding is a little bit of a different process. They start with a tube of copper that they would put onto a steel rod, and then they'd slowly draw that sucker down, and it would get longer and longer and longer and longer, and the copper would clad to the steel. And I was intrigued with the sound of these strings because they look completely different, but they still worked really well on magnetic pickups. and they sounded like piano strings. They were nice and bright. When we put the bass string out first, then we put electric guitar strings out as well. We sold a lot of these for about 5 years. The downfall of this was that they would turn green or they'd get your hands dirty, and they didn't hold the tone long enough. But they sounded great out of the package. In the United States, the business model in our industry, and many industries, was, basically a 2 or 3 step supply chain. And there were close to 100 or maybe even more than 100 musical instrument and accessory distributors in America alone in the 70s and 80s. We started to consider, how do we get our message to the retailer? We were trying to get it to the consumer via advertising in Guitar Player magazine and telling them about our product, and we hoped that they would walk into a retailer and ask for the product, then the retailer would ask for it from the distributor. That's a pretty long leap. Unless you had something truly unique like half-round strings, there was nothing else like that. Half-round and phosphor bronze were so unique that the distributors did take those because nobody else had them. So I made an ad that said, "We bet you $10 you'll love our strings." We ran it twice, and 1,500 dealers sent in $10. Most of them just put $10 in an envelope. So we sent these little assortment of 10 sets out with, a couple of XL sets, a couple of phosphor bronze sets, a couple of classic sets. That instantly got us recognition as a brand. That $500 worth of advertising immediately triggered the distributors to have to buy our product because the dealers tried it. They said, "This is better," and they wanted it. I realized right away that, oh my God, if we were talking directly with the retailer, we would do a lot better. And that was something that some of our competitors were more clever than us, figured out before us. Ernie Ball and Dean Markley, when he came along, they started selling directly to retailers right away. And they had a huge advantage over us because they had a dialogue going with the retailer, and they were just one step closer to the consumer. So it was very hard to get a distributor to stock a dulcimer string or a mandolin string or anything that wouldn't sell in high quantity. So once we had the ability to sell directly to the retailer, one of the roadblocks was that some of them just didn't really want to bother just buying strings from us. They could get them from a distributor. So we really needed some other products. And our neighbor at the Frankfurt Fair every year, right next to us, was the Van Doren Reed Company. We got friendly, they had some really nice cheese and wine in their booths, so, I'd sneak over there when we weren't busy. And Bernard and John and I got to be pretty friendly. Very similar family story to ours. Bernard was not satisfied with his distributor in the United States. Their lawyers would come here and meet with our lawyers. And then finally, we met in the city for dinner with our wives, and I could be a little blunt and candid. I said, "Bernard, let's just have a nice dinner together, but, I can't really put any more work into this unless I know that we're going to actually be partners and we're going to do this distribution thing." And he always told a story about how he felt that was like New York pushy. And sure enough, we did make the deal, and it was a great deal for both our companies for 22, 23 years, and we're still good friends and all. We really built the Van Doren business up nicely here in America and Canada. And, we started doing some really nice marketing for them, and they used the marketing worldwide. We did a lot of artist relations, landed a lot of key players, and, that less than 1 million reads a year, I think it was 11 million reads a year when we parted ways in 2004. Roll the clock forward, and I get a call from Bill Carpenter, who was the president of Ricoh, and they weren't very profitable as a company. Their best division was the Ricoh division, Reeds, which competed directly with Van Doren, but was more of known for their orange box student reed. And Van Doren always was like, how do we get into the student market? And we had negotiated several times to build a factory here as a joint venture, and we would make the student reed here, but he just never pulled the trigger on it. So Bill Carpenter had approached me and said we would be comfortable negotiating with you if you're interested in the business. So I went to Van Doren and said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Yeah, let's buy it together." I did all the due diligence, looking at their plantations in south of France and in South America, their factory in Sun Valley, negotiated a deal, and we were ready to sign it, and Van Doren just changed his mind at the last minute, said he didn't want to do it. And I said, "Well, we're going to go ahead with this ourselves, if you're not going to do it with us. We did it amicably. We're still good friends. We kept distributing their product for 2 years to help them transition to their own distribution company, Dancer. I mean, we could have just pulled the rug out from under them and they would have had no distribution in America, but we didn't want that reputation and we didn't want to hurt a friend. So the Rico operation is very similar to what Van Doren does. We grow in the south of France and in Argentina on our own plantations. It has to be in an area where the plant goes dormant in the winter and the chlorophyll kind of leaves the plant, and the winter hardens the wood and tempers it so it will vibrate properly, but it can't freeze. And if you lose a field to frost or wind or fire, you don't get any cane from that field for 2 or 3 years because you got to replant it. The processes that we developed after buying the company, completely throwing away every machine they had and making new digital reed machines and blanking machines, has enabled us to make such a precise cut on the reed that when you buy a box of 10, you don't just get 3 that play well, you usually get 10. So roll the clock back to 1995, I felt like, I kind of achieved a lot in terms of string manufacturing. The machinery, was making the best product that anybody could make. Wasn't as fully automated as we've taken it now, but it was making a comparably great product to what we make today. And I felt like, oh wow, I've learned all these things to do to make a factory great, that I want to try to use that paint box on some other things. We get a chance to consider acquiring the Evans Drumhead Company. They invented the synthetic drumhead in 1957. It was copied by Remo. And they did $1 million a year in business in Dodge City, Kansas, but they only had 5% market share. And Remo had like 90. So this is the very first synthetic drumhead that is still actually is in, has tension on it. Chick Evans, who was the founder of the company, was a drummer. And he wasn't a businessman at all. And he was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He lived in an apartment building and he played gigs at night. He had this great idea, which was he took this wooden flesh hoop that they used to use to mount a calfskin on. Like at the Ludwig factory, I was told that at times they had 40 people stretching calf drum heads onto flesh hoops just to ship their drums and have replacement heads. Now you can imagine a calf head, very similar situation to a gut string. Humidity, temperature change, dryness, too much humidity. This thing's gonna be all over the place, right? It's gonna be really loose, it's gonna be too tight and break. It's gonna change tension no matter where you take the drum. And drums had to live with that. It was a difficult thing to live with. And this came along, it revolutionized it. Unfortunately, the construction that Chick Evans came up with, and he used to make these in the basement of his apartment building, was to use like thumbtacks. And it's 2 pieces of wood, and he would cut all these slits in the head in the film, and then he would stick it in there and he'd tack it around. And to be honest, it didn't last as long as he wanted it to, but it lasted a lot longer than a calf's skin head, and it sounded great. When he came up with a coating so you could play a brush on it, then it really kind of duplicated what you could do on a calfskin head. And he started sending samples out to stores, and one of the stores he sent out was Drum City and Studio City in California, and Remo Belli was the manager of the store. We have telegrams from Remo to Chick Evans, urgent, want to meet with you, want to be distributor for the entire West Coast. And so Remo Belli was completely obsessed with this invention. And he flew out to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where Chick Evans was. And he had an appointment. While he was waiting in Chick's office, Remo kind of helped himself to some brochures off of the desk. And Bob Beals, who purchased the idea and the IP from Chick Evans about 6 or 9 months later, and really started to make a company out of it. What happened afterward was Remo very cleverly came up with a U-shaped aluminum-formed channel hoop that he then bent the film into and poured an epoxy, and it was a superior way of doing it. And he had a patent on that. It wasn't until like 1987 or 1988 that Evans could make a head that way. So, they were really stifled from competing in the market. It wasn't until like 1988 that he started to innovate and make some new things when he was able to make a metal hoop. And that's what this one was, because he did all the design and CAD system. He called it the CAD CAM hoop. And this is the blue hydraulic head, which is very damped and was something that was a fad in the 80s when everybody wanted that really dry sound. And they discovered this by accident. Somebody had just spilled a couple of drops of mineral oil on some film, and they made a 2-ply head when the oil was between it. And suddenly it was so damp. And they're like, wow, that's cool. And they asked some people to play it, and next thing you know, it became a big product for them. And we still sell quite a few hydraulic drum heads. It's a unique sound. I mean, Steve Gadd sound, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, that's this head. And, it's been imitated in multiple ways since, but that was a clever invention. So in 1995, I went to see the factory, and, the tooling and the way he was making everything, I could immediately see that we could really improve this dramatically. We could take what he had there as the kernel and really grow something nice. So we acquired the company in 1995. We tried to run it in Dodge City for 2 years. We made some improvements, but it was hard to get them to stick, and we didn't have the personnel there available to us. So we moved Evans here in 98, and we had to learn the drumhead business from scratch. We started to build machinery that made better heads, formed them better. We've got patents on certain things. We noticed that Remo's heads and our heads that we were making with the Evans tooling, when we formed the head with the heat, the vibrating area of the head sometimes would get like buckles and ripples. We only really needed to bend the collar. So we came up with an idea that we got a patent on, where we cooled the mold in the middle so the film where it vibrates never gets hot. And we only bend the area that we have to bend to get it into the hoop. And that made a huge difference. We set about trying to figure out what makes a better formed head. And, we've nailed it now, and we make, our product is really, really consistent. You're going to get the same sounding drum head every time you buy it. So the goal was, hey, how do we perfect a drum head? And then that became, how do we perfect anything we decide to make organically or from acquire a company and transition it into being a D'Addario company.